Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are excited that so many of you could join us tonight for On the Land in Our Bones. I'm Pele Shalev, Public Events Specialist for the California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. We may be joining from different places all over the world. And as a representative of CIIS, I want to begin by acknowledging our debt and gratitude to the Ramaytu Ohlone, who are the original peoples and continual caretakers of the San Francisco Peninsula. CIIS campus is located on the traditional, unceded lands of the Ramaytu Ohlone, which they call Yelamu. In the Ramaytu Ohlone language, Yelamu identifies both the people and the territory. This acknowledgement is just a single small step towards being in deeper connection and relationship with indigenous tribes and organizations in our community, and does not begin to acknowledge all of the native lands, languages, and territories where you are right now, or where you live and work every day. I invite you to take a moment now to acknowledge the land where you reside and to commit to learn more about the Native communities near you and to support their work. If it feels right for you to share in the chat, please do. We always recommend native-land.ca as a starting resource. I want to go over a few general tips and troubleshooting items. We will have a Q&A after the conversation today. Please submit your questions at any time using our anonymous web form, which is linked in the event description below this video. We do have automatically generated captions for this event, which you can toggle on and off using the closed captioning button in YouTube. Chat will be enabled during this event, but please note that it is not being moderated and our presenters cannot see the chat. Chat is not required to fully experience the event. If you choose to participate in chat, please be respectful and avoid language that could be offensive or insensitive to others. You can turn the chat off at any time, and we encourage you to do so if you find that it is negatively impacting your experience in any way. If you are having issues with your audio or video, we always suggest you start by refreshing your page. And then if you still have issues, we suggest that you adjust your video settings within YouTube. Now, let me first introduce our presenters, Layla and Maryam, and then we'll get right to the conversation. Maryam Hasnaa is an intuitive, a channel, an energy healer, and a lover of all things that create a feeling of being connected to something bigger than ourselves. Maryam is the creator of New Earth Mystery School and Resonance Apothecary. Layla K. Feghali is an ethnobotanist, cultural worker, and author who lives between her ancestral village in Lebanon and her diasporic home in California, where she was born and raised. Her dedication is the stewardship of decolonization and eco-cultural remembrance, and the many layers of relational restoration, systemic reckoning, and healing that entails. Feghali's work emphasizes land-based medicines, ancestral practices, and peoples from the Crossroads, also known as Southwest Asia, Northern Africa, or the Middle East, and its diasporas. Her recent book, The Land in Our Bones, documents cultural, herbal, and healing knowledge from Syria to the Sinai, while interrogating colonialism and its lingering wounds on the culture of our displaced world. And now, let me turn it over to Maryam and Layla.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Maryam Hasnaa, and I'm also in the land of the Ohlone people. I'm on the land of the redwoods, the manzanitas, and the bay laurels, the elderberries. I'm also in the land of the California wild rose and the California poppies, the coyote mints, and the hummingbirds and the blue jays. And I'm so delighted to be here with you all. And just before I joined, there was some hail coming down in my area, which is pretty rare. So I kind of feel like the elements were showing off a little bit in preparation for this conversation. So hello, dear Layla, how are you?
Hi, Maryam. Thank you so much. That was a beautiful acknowledgement of welcoming the plantcestors of the land you're on. And I'm connecting to you all today from the land of the Tongva Tataviam people, which share a lot of the plants you mentioned, but not all of them. This is the territory of white sage and poso blue, of the California poppies, and the Pacific Ocean, of course, and so many other beautiful plantcestors and animal kin and indigenous peoples.
Yes, and we're here to go deeply into this conversation about this beautiful body of work that you shared with us. First of all, I've told you before, but I'll say it again. Thank you so much for writing this book. One of the most interesting things that I have found about this book is the timing of its arrival on the earth. What that indicates to me is that you were deeply listening to the call of the earth and deeply listening to the call of your ancestors to create this, and the timing of it arriving now during what we're experiencing and witnessing in the world with the current genocide. I'd love to have you just share a little bit about how the timing of this all feels for you.
Thank you. Yeah, wow. You know, it's been actually this book, it's been years, at least a decade that my ancestors and my elders had been kind of nudging me to write a book. I knew that there was a book that wanted to be birthed. And in fact, I wrote a completely different manuscript that I had been in process around and thought would maybe come into the world. And then I kind of put it down for a while and thought I might just let it be. And then I received this invitation to publish with North Atlantic Books. And I, walked through the open door to do it. And it, kind of asked me to, write a different book, a similar or a connected, but a kind of a whole new book. I had no idea that it would be born into a world where my own people and my own region would be enduring this level of genocide and desecration. And I'm very humbled by it and sometimes overwhelmed by it. It's brought up a lot of contradictory feelings for me. It's a hard time to celebrate birthing something, or just to celebrate in the midst of so much suffering and loss. And at the same time, it does feel like the ancestors have their own plan and the earth has its own purpose for this book, because this book is about the Levant. It is about Palestine and Lebanon and Syria and these places that have been targeted right now. And it's about our life affirming traditions, and it's about our land, and it's about the ways that colonialism has impacted us and the ways that we've survived and persisted and continue to be anchored in love and self-determination and care for the earth and each other, despite all those things. So truly, I'm sort of, curious about what this book wants to offer to the moment. And I feel like it's sort of still unfolding,
Sure.
And just trying to really humbly trust that the knowledge in this book will be of service to the healing that is needed.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I know just from knowing you and also getting to dive into your work a little bit more, and having similarities in both of our paths of stewardship, and yet kind of seeing you, coming to the forefront in terms of speaking engagements and being invited to share about this work in this moment. And yet a lot of this work is behind the scenes. It's things that people don't see or know about. And a lot of times this work is the earth asking you to do something that might not completely make sense to you in that moment. And yet, where that call is coming from, that you can trust it, and that to fully show up for that call is why you're here. So you talk a lot about stewardship in your book, stewardship of culture and family and medicine, and you share a lot of like really beautiful, sacred stories that you honored of people that you've crossed paths with and people that have influenced you. And I remember when we were talking about the book and you were saying, I really feel you're gonna love the part about the cedar trees. And I was like, how did you know I was gonna love the part about the cedar trees? And there was a lot of kind of mystical reverence that was explicitly spoken about when you were talking about the stewards of the cedars and that land, and it being a portal for all
Mhm.
kinds of different healing and regeneration that the earth is providing. And you and I have had different conversations about how the earth has the ability to deeply listen to what we're experiencing and to show up with a very particular kind of medicine. And that medicine is often shared through the food and the
Right.
plants and all of the beings that are on that land. So as stewards, right, this is like it's becoming like a trendier word, or to be
Right.
like an earth steward. But one thing I think that's not quite as often talked about is how, and this was really prevalent in the part about those that guard the cedar trees, is that it is about guardianship.
Right.
Can you say a little bit more about, that balancing of our love for the plants, and we love to share it with people, and we love to bond with people over our love for the plants, and it also requires discernment with what we're sharing and how we're sharing it. And I know that's something that you grappled with in the book of, some of this stuff is so sacred to me that
Right.
I don't want to like invite people into that, and yet also it wants to be shared. So yeah, I would love to hear more from you about that.
Oh man, I love that you asked that question, and especially because I know that you ask it from such a personal place and that it's something that we share in our negotiation of, being in roles of teaching and sharing and offering and serving and also yeah, being guardians. And I feel like you know, guardianship is such a massive part of the work, actually. And, there is an element of guardianship that is about the sharing, because the sharing is what guards the fact that knowledge persists and continues, and that the way that we learn to care for land is passed down and supported, and um, that generational knowledge can persist. And then there is so much about the way that we live in a culture of consumption and extraction that also makes certain kinds of knowledge and certain kinds of traditions vulnerable
Mm,
to being exploited and to being manipulated, and for the power, the inherent
mm,
power inside these traditions to be misused. And sometimes that happens through being misused by corporations, or, capitalized or profited, or just, negligently
mm,
taken more than given to. But
mm,
sometimes also it can be misused in the hands of people who sincerely mean well and are just not meant for that knowledge. And
mm.
that's kind of a hard thing, I think,
Yeah.
for diasporic folks in particular. But one thing that I've learned from the earth-based stewards and the indigenous stewards in my life that have I've been, very honored to learn from in any way, shape, or form, is that, everyone gets something different, and every conversation changes based on who's there, because um, we all have our own role. We all have our own role. And so much of guardianship means, taking care of our role, and also respectfully being humble about, you know, just staying in our lane, honestly. Um, and I don't claim to be the person to
Mm,
determine what someone's lane
sure.
is. But with that chapter with the cedar elders, actually, I was very those elders are elders that I've been building with for years. They're like family to me. And for the first several years of building with them, there was a lot of hesitation they had
Yeah.
around sharing with other people. I had actually been trying to invite sharing knowledge and some teachings about the region, because the guardianship of that particular ecosystem is so critical right now. It's so critical, and it's so compromised. that and you know, there's a lot of trust that we've had with each other that was almost immediate in some ways, but there was a lot of hesitation about sharing beyond that, which I really respected. And that cued for me that I need to really honor also that what I'm shared with doesn't mean that it's for everyone all the time. And so I actually intentionally went to visit them when I was writing this book and explicitly asked them what they wanted to share with this broader audience. And just to respect that process and let them kind of determine that for themselves. But it is always a dance of, I think, really listening to the cues and trusting that knowledge will, you know, arrive to who it's meant to, and that also that it's going to be understood in layers based on who's receiving it, and surrendering to the rest.
Yeah.
With a lot of prayers, with a lot of, like, you know, prayers for protection and purpose and intention. But yeah.
Yeah, I love what you're talking about. And, you know, one thing I know about this path is that it goes at its own pace and it has its own timing. And, you know, that there's been plants that I've been, like, let's say kava, for example, that I've been courting for a very long time. And at some point, you know, recognizing, like, yeah, if I want to build a deeper relationship with kava, I'm going to need to go, you know, where it lives and meet the people that have been stewarding it for generations. And I'm happy to do that.
Right.
You know,
Right.
it just the same way as if you were having a relationship with a person,
Right.
you're happy to invest the time and the resources and the dedication and to build that trust, because it's something that is going to it's going to be reciprocal, you know.
Right.
So you want to show up in that way.
Right. Right.
So, you know, you talk so much about the role of land and the way, you know, something in your book that you talked about was how your parents were tethered to their inherent dignity. And that was something that over time, you know, really became clear to you through the way that your parents and your grandparents, how they moved and how they showed up, and that taught you so much about them. And, you know, you said you love the way that your grandmother's body made home in foreign earth. And these are so there's so many beautiful gifts and abilities and, you know, and different types of awarenesses that are connected to, like, our sensory body and our intuitive self and to our spirit, that come from that relationship with land. And you go into that so much in the book, but I just love for you to share a little bit more about what you would like people to hear about that.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. I think one of the most powerful things about plants is that, and about being on a path of, you know, connection and kinship with plants, is that they kind of automatically bring you back into your sensory body, because that's the language that we're able to speak and understand, and also to receive and exchange medicine with them through. And so much of our, just the way that we're taught to be in the modern just systems that we live in as folks, especially folks in the global north and in city centers, et cetera, is very cerebral and kind of disconnects us from the inherent kind of the primordial language of our bodies and of ourselves as earth beings. You know, we are related to the plants. We also drink sunlight and starlight and water and soil and minerals. You know, we're made of the same stuff. And the earth has this powerful way of really bringing us back into, you know, needing to attune and listen and show up in our own bodies if we want to attune to them and understand and deepen. And so it's kind of like it is a remembrance of a profound kind. It is a returning to kind of an essential primordial sort of our first language, our first way of knowing, our first way of being, and also just the sensual beauty and pleasure and depth and possibility that exists within, being in multisensory conversation with our existence.
Mm.
And so, the plants I think are very underrated as like a primary somatic healing tool, if we want to use that kind of language, because our relationship with them brings us into our bodies and the body of the earth in a way that is so natural and so profound and so healing. And it starts to kind of thaw out some of the colonial and like linear and overly cerebral sort of rigidity and oppression and
Yeah,
domination that
yeah,
we just internalized to survive being on the earth in this moment, or the yeah the societies that we've created.
yeah. It's like there's these patterns of like survival and kind of what it took for us to arrive at this point, and those skills were necessary and needed, and they allowed us to be here. And there's so much more to feel. There's so much more to be, and so much more to relate to, and to receive, and to also express and emanate. And just before our conversation, I read a quote and it said, "Rituals are not just an invitation to the elements, they are an invocation of the senses." And you talk a lot about, sensory awareness, sensory attunement, sensuality. And you also talk about ritual quite a bit in the rituals of reclaiming names and reclaiming traditions and reclaiming culture and really kind of owning things. And this idea of belonging is uh, a beautiful theme that is woven in. At the same time, it's woven in the context of what colonialism has done and how it intentionally, as you said, intentionally disrupts our roots, and it creates that displacement, right? And it severs us from our culture. So can you speak a little bit about why are rituals so important as a reclamation practice when these are the wounds that we're dealing with? You say original wounds require original medicine.
Yeah. And I think for me, the original medicine, it's the earth, it's the land. That is like that's just part of our nature as being humans,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
we're, as long as we're in these bodies, the earth is that lifeline. It's that mother that we're all kind of feeding from and with, and that's reflecting the cosmos to us in our immediate everyday. And rituals help us reattune to the vibration of life within that reality. They bring us back into that reality. They tether us kind of to the reality of our beingness in a way that provides expansive structure, just enough structure to arrive in our beings so that we can attune and align and receive and connect with the worlds around us intentionally and with purpose and with care. Um, and it's part of the rhythms. A lot of the ritual and belonging, I talk a lot about how belonging is less about, if we think the same way or if we
Yeah.
have the same idea or our identity a lot of the time, than it is about continually showing up and the ritual of continually arriving and coming back to and being in the same place with. And it's really a relationship. It's
Yeah.
basically about the cultivation of a relationship that brings you home.
Yeah, it doesn't get much more primordial than the earth, right?
Exactly. We're talking real basics here, fundamentals, literally.
Right. And I love what you're saying about belonging and this kind of idea that belonging means same. And I got a lot of opportunities to experience that when you and I even first started
Mhm.
connecting, because we kind of just dove right in, and there was not a lot of pretense. It was just having like really honest conversations from the beginning. And what I experienced was that there was a lot of resonance and there was a lot of respect and care.
Mhm.
And there were also these places of difference.
Right.
And even though we are both in a way like on this path, we have different roles on this path.
Absolutely.
And that was something that we, identified really early on. And at the same time, what I experienced with you was that I could see how what you were doing was in service to what I'm doing, and how
Right.
what I'm doing is in service to what you're doing. And how we have a lot of the same plant
Mhm.
allies and plant kin, right? So they kind of created a bridge between us to speak that common language of plants,
Right.
and the plants that we walk with and have built these relationships with. So it's been lovely to engage with those points of difference, because for me that's where the leading edge is. That's
Right.
where like there's an opportunity for expansion and deepening, and also clarifying and
Right.
refining, like what is it that I'm here to do. And I think I jokingly said like, oh, we get to spar. Like I love that about our relationship. Like we kind of get to engage with those points of difference with a lot of skill and a lot of care,
Right.
right? And one thing I also really appreciate about your work, and why I think your work is so important in this moment, is because of your relationship with being born, in California, and then
Mhm.
spending time in your ancestral land, but not having the exact same experience as someone that was, born there and
Raised
spent their
there.
whole life there, right? That you kind of understand both worlds, right? So
Right.
you're one of those people that kind of walks between worlds. And so for people that have even less of a relationship to their
Right.
ancestral land, right? For me, I remember like on my 40th birthday, my mom said, I was born in Libya, and my mom said, you have to go back and get as close to that land as
Wow.
possible. It was something that she knew that was going to be awakened,
Wow.
was going to be activated. And it's been since then that I've gone back every year and
Wow.
sort of picked up on those breadcrumbs that my ancestors will have dropped,
Mm.
right? And I'm aware that there are people that have an even less of a relationship
Right.
than I have, right? And I'd love you to speak to that directly, of
Mm.
how do we relate to
Mhm.
our ancestral land if like I can't even go where I was born in Libya,
Right.
right?
Wow. Yeah.
And that longing of kind of just like I can kind of get close, but I
Right.
can't really go there. Um, and some people don't have the ability, the capability, or access to go at all,
Right.
not even close. And some
Right.
people don't even know where
Right.
their ancestral lands are.
Right.
And that's a lot of people's experience now.
Absolutely.
So, and you speak
Absolutely.
about that, but I'd love to hear
Yeah.
you share a little bit more about what how do we connect?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That's really beautiful and powerful. I also want to say one thing before I acknowledge that, because something you were saying about how, in our relationship, it's like, okay, we have different roles. There's some connections, there's some peership, there's some, unique ways that we interface. There's some sparring, and it really reminds me of the guardianship question from the beginning. And it comes back to that thing of, we really do have, we all have a different role. And
Mhm.
like we do learn from nature that what maintains the integrity of life is biodiversity.
Mm.
And it's really about each person being able to embody their specific role. And so I can be like, okay, okay, Maryam, like I'm, you know, you have gifts that relate to the ethereal realms that I I understand parts of, but I'm also like, yeah, that I don't feel like that's supposed to be my focus right now. And so I get to entrust that through your, you know, integrous stewardship of that, that my stewardship of the things that are mine to care for can be better and vice versa, and that it really, I feel like guardianship in a lot of ways comes down to that, like what is our specific purpose and our specific role. So I just wanted to say that. But yeah, you know, I talk about the not being able to access ancestral lands a lot in the book. And because I come from a region where, you know, a lot of my, you know, cousins, siblings, relatives of, you know, Cana'an or the Levant can't go back, literally. People can't return to Palestine or Syria or their village here or their village there. And even those who can, like me, you know, there have been times in my life where I couldn't, you know, and there have been I've had to make very intentional choices about you know, reinvesting in a relationship there, even with family there, even with
Mhm.
access, even with the privileges that have been granted to me to actually have access. And so, you know, it's a real thing. And this is actually so much of the book and my Plantcestral Remembrance, you know, methodology is from the place of diaspora that doesn't get to go back. And it's really that I really feel that the plants of our grandmother's kitchen, you know, of our parental homes. And you know what? Even if you're adopted and you don't really have that, something in your body will resonate with plants of a place, of a culture, of a lineage, of there is some way that the plants and food is such an easy access way towards them, that they wake up things and that they travel with us and they come with us to all these places, and that re-engaging the plants of our ancestral and lineages, you know, our lineages and our traditions becomes a portal way towards embodying home when we can't physically arrive there. And when you can't even do that because you really just don't know or you don't have access to them, honestly, I truly believe that connecting to the indigenous plants where you are is a portal way too, because the earth is our primordial mother. It's just, that's just how it is by design. And the earth will, it will unfold its own kind of story and path once you start to be in relationship with it. And the plants of the place where you are, that you breathe every day and you eat every day, they know your being, they know your spirit, they know your body too. The water that you drink, the bodies of water and those places, they have their own intelligence. And I think when we start to engage the land where we are with intention, you know, things open and
Mhm.
answers start to come in those sensual, less linear ways, and we find our way.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I love the part that stood out to me that in the most in what you just said is when we engage with intention.
Right.
I think, you know, the thing that happens with this and so many other things is that when it starts to gain traction, it gets reworked by people for their own needs and their own agendas, and it's very easy. And this is something that you and I have talked about in regards to some of even the work, that I put out, of how it's this kind of tricky balance of knowing that there are people that are going to take the language that I use and the things that I say and use that as an opportunity to justify harmful behavior. And, currently right now, we've seen a boost in travel blogging and people being called places and, really bypassing responsibility, as you mentioned when we chatted about this before. What can you say that might be missing from that equation? Because I feel that what I really appreciate about your book and the way that you kind of laid things out is that you don't just leave people that don't have the connections kind of like out on the road. You're like, no, you get to be a part of this too. And you offer specific ways that can be done with intention and with integrity. So can you talk a little bit about what might be missing from the equation when people kind of use that framework of I was called to this place, and yet might not recognize that some of the ways that they're relating to the land really mimic the colonial harm, right? I spoke about that a framework that I have when I teach about being called somewhere is to don't assume that you know what that call means, because sometimes actually that feeling of that pull or that attraction is because you have karmic work to clean up, and that in regards to what your ancestors have done in that land, right? Not just because you know it from a past life or something like that. It can be a lot different than that. So I do think that you offer quite a bit of frameworks and tools about that. And I'd love you to just share, what can be missing from the equation sometimes.
Yeah. It's such an important question. Thank you for, just attuning to just how real that phenomenon is. It's really just, it is actual relationship and responsibility. I mean, it's really that these places, first of all, are not empty places, they're places with living people and cultures that have their own realities and their own struggles and their own loss and their own things that they're trying to maintain, and their land that has experienced its own, it has its own intelligence and its own ecosystem. And we don't really get to just decide that we want to go somewhere with complete disregard for what the people who steward that place feel, or how they are impacted by our being somewhere. And I think a lot of what happens in, the privileges of the Western diaspora in particular is that people, a lot of us haven't been socialized within values that center relationship and responsibility and reciprocity in the way that the earth actually requires to thrive and be balanced and well, and that we all require to be balanced and well. And so I think that, there's a piece around what are we contributing to the place that we're feeling called to? Do we have, is the call, calls need a response, like calls need a response. Like, is the call reciprocated? Is there energy in both directions? Is there, how much intent and effort and, relationship has really been invested? And then we kind of go somewhere, and then when we get what we need, we throw it away. And whatever we left behind is left behind. I'm being reminded of this woman, a very powerful curandera from the Amazon. Her name is Eda Zavala. It's possible folks on this call have heard of her because she's come through the Bay Area several times, and she works with the sacred medicine of ayahuasca, as well as, is a very fierce um, defender of the indigenous communities of um, different Amazonian tribes between Ecuador and Peru, if I recall. And she talked a lot about, this ayahuasca is a really simple example for this, because ayahuasca is one of these plants that everyone suddenly, somehow everyone is called to ayahuasca. No shade intended, but like it's just like everyone you go and it's everywhere. I mean, I go to like Egypt or something and I meet people who are sitting in ayahuasca ceremonies, and plants do call people and calls are real. But she talked a lot about, people in the West who are being called to this medicine need to understand that our communities that have been traditionally stewarding these traditions are being completely eroded and destroyed by the West's obsession about this medicine and the ways that it's being consumed and the ways that it's being extracted and the ways that even people in our own territories are basically resorting to selling it because of the economic need, and that there is no way to be in an integrous relationship with this medicine if you are not also in an integrous relationship with its people. And that's the same with places, what are we doing to ensure that these places have, what are we doing to support their sovereignty, their needs, their cultures, their ability to practice and to steward and to care for these beautiful, powerful places all over the earth. And so it really comes down to relationship and reciprocity and the humility to be in a conversation about it so that the call can receive a response before you just run with something because you feel like it. And this is a difficult thing. And again, I'm not claiming to be an authority on this. On the contrary, I honestly try to double check things with elders, with whatever forms that I have, with dreams, with oracles, with divinations, with whatever it is. But the truth is that a lot of the times what we feel is a call because many of us have lived lifetimes disconnected from the traditions and the cues that help us discern these things. Yeah, like you said, they're not always a call because of the reason we think, but they're also sometimes not a call. And we're still reclaiming and remembering our spiritual tools of discernment to even assess the signs we're receiving.
Yeah, thank you so much for diving into that question. And something that I often work with people on is when they want to start working with nature spirits and devas and elementals and beings in the unseen. One of the most important things is to throw away what you think you know about them,
right?
Because you're not going to actually be able to meet them if you're projecting ideas of what you thought a fairy was from a Disney movie and stuff like that. So, we do have some purification work that we have to do before we're clear channels to be able to actually understand what are those sensations that are coming up in our body and how do we actually translate what they mean and where they're coming from and what's kind of driving our behavior. You spoke about the over harvesting of plants, and you talked about why it is that you have such a love for flower essences. Can you just say a little bit about that? Because I obviously also have a deep love for flower essences and just the way that they are vibrational and homeopathic, and they're ethereal, and they don't require the harvesting of this bulk amount of plant matter. I just love you to say whatever wants to be said about the flower essences.
Oh man, this is where like our ethereal like inclinations meet for sure. I mean, who doesn't love flowers?
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly, they're
Yeah.
like just magical, powerful, potent, um, you know, just yeah, beautiful beings. And what's so powerful about flower essences to me is, first of all, it's just such ancient medicine that has been our there is like no people on this earth that has flowers where they live that has not
Yeah.
recognized the medicine of flowers and like what happens when flowers meet water and sunshine. And that's just part of it is just, universal medicine, that people all over the earth recognize and have felt the power of. And so connecting to them in that way connects us to a whole lineage of kinship with just these beautiful, generous, abundant, gorgeous beings that we get
Yeah.
to like experience on the earth, and all their pollinators and all the light and the consciousness that they carry.
Indeed.
And so I think what's really powerful about flower essences, especially as such a sensitive person, is that they're so potent and they really actually they undo so much of the colonial
Mhm.
indoctrination we
Mhm.
have about like what medicine is and what is needed for medicine and how medicine works.
Yeah.
And they really get to the root of kind of like the spiritual root of issues, and then they heal our body from that place,
Yeah.
or they can. And they're just powerful. And I share this in the book too, but there's this Afro-Brazilian elder,
Mhm.
um, Maestra, what, oh my gosh, I forgot her name for a second. Um, she's a beautiful elder. She came to teach us a workshop. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her name, but it is in the book. Is her name Alice? Maria? Okay, I'm sorry. I'm bad. Okay. In all cases, this Afro-Brazilian elder really said that when she went to make flower essences in her territory and she asked the flower, or she asked for a remedy that was needed for this person who needed a medicine that was going to shift their consciousness, what she received in her dreams was instructions to make basically a flower essence. And that she said that these medicines really are, a medicine for our time because they're a medicine for shifting consciousness
Mhm.
and shifting things and transforming things from the level of consciousness. And I really, I had a very brief encounter with her. I got to learn from her for like what, 2 hours, only. But her teachings were really powerful and really resonated with me. And that particular teaching really rings as true.
Yeah.
So I think that they are really potent medicine. And yeah, and they really welcome us to connect with such intention and presence with the plants without needing to take like very much from them. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. Um, and I know that we jokingly talked about our love of bonding over plants and how much we love being with plants, and sometimes it's hard being with people. And if you could just share a little bit about some of the deeper shadow parts of this
Yeah.
work in your experience.
Yeah. I actually love people. I'm a very relational person. That's probably why I do this work. But I also feel like, people hurt my feelings a lot.
Mm.
And, the relational ruptures in our just social conditioning through this time are very real and very deep. And actually, so much of why I started this work, I think, is because of my desire to heal our capacity to relate well, because um, it's so fundamental to our dignity and our well-being as people and as a planet and on every level. And so I feel like plants actually help us heal that. So they are easier to relate to because
Yeah.
the lack of those things, but they also help heal our knowing how to be in right relationship in a way that is just built into
Yeah.
caring for plants and observing plants and learning from the earth in that way. And, when I say plants, I'm like, it's not just plants. It's like
Right.
plants connect us to soil, to water, to stars, to sun, to all the elements, to the air, to everything. So, and to the stories and the people and the pollinators and the animals, it's everything. They're just bridges that are quite accessible. And I think, yeah, the shadow work, this work can be this work can be really isolating and really lonely. And it's interesting because I feel very honored and thankful that I think my work has actually built so much community. I don't always feel like I'm a part of the community the same way, which is, this is just one of those like the wounds, like the wounds that you create because of, you create because you want certain things that you didn't have. And sometimes the role is that you create it for others, and
Absolutely.
you end up in this weird marginalized place despite that. And there are a lot, the dark night of the soul thing is one of the real things that I think, some of these like sci-fi,
Oh, man.
like some of the Harry Potters and the sci-fi things, like they might be wrong about fairies, but like the dark nights of the soul
Gosh.
real. And they can last for much longer than a
Yeah.
night. And there's so many layers of just interrogation with yourself and with your own process and with, just all the layers and the ruptures of our reality right now that you kind of interface when you remain on a ritual of stewardship around culture and lineage and healing for long enough. It's just kind of part of the territory. And there's not that much support all the time. Sometimes you're lucky and you have elders and traditions that help you, and sometimes you find yourself all alone.
Yeah.
And like, you know,
Yeah.
a lot of the times you find yourself all alone. So it's very humbling. It's a very humbling road.
Yes, yes, yeah, I agree. I mean, the initiations and the tests and the opportunities to embody what you say you're here to teach, it's never ending, especially in this current time of planetary awakening. And I remember a teacher, Sandra Ingerman, just recently started teaching publicly again and said she had been in a dark night of the soul for the last 9 years.
Wow, exactly, exactly. I feel her.
Yeah. So it's not as glamorous as it we might make it look sometimes.
Yeah, no.
It definitely, I think there's a cutoff point when it's kind of like if this isn't really your path, you're
Yeah,
not going to be willing to endure all
right.
of the trials and tribulations that you're being put through,
True.
because they are real. And I do feel that the earth is in a way, like requiring more of us,
Right.
and asking more of us, giving these little assignments to see, are you actually going to do the thing that you're being asked to do? And I always talk about how, when there are calls put out, oftentimes there's multiple calls put out because some people aren't going to be successful in their assignment,
Right.
and that's not a judgment, but there is so much distortion, in our current time that we have to slice through, and illusion that we have to be able to move through to actually be able to,
Exactly.
recall what we're here for. Why did we
Right.
say that we would come here and do this, right?
Right.
And the interesting thing about the timing of your book is that you you say that it's something that you were kind of working on for a long time, and that was kind of cooking in the background, and yet it came to the world in this moment. And as you said, you had no idea
Right.
whatsoever that the many of the beloved people on the land that you speak about, that there would be so much devastation currently happening. I think when you were writing it, you know, a lot of it was talking about some of the past kind of displacement that we're going to need to address. But now there's this whole other layer and dimension of it exponentially happening. So if you were writing this book now, what would you do anything differently? Would you add anything else to it?
Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot, and I think so. There were things that happened even while I was writing it, like the August 4th explosion of the port in Beirut happened, and it was a moment where it actually pulled people back into these traditions in so many ways, by need. But like what's happening now is like, I'm like, wow, what does an herbalist do on land that is being completely destroyed and covered with white phosphorus? Where are the herbs to speak of? How do these traditions help in a moment like this? And I think that had I been writing it now, I would have focused a little bit more. I talk about this in the book, but I think I would have focused a little bit more pointedly on just the relationship between land stewardship and sovereignty movements, the need and the responsibility for that. I think I would have maybe thought about more of the kind of specific ways that relating to land and that land as medicine could serve and help in practical forms in this moment, and could also be more of a guidepost for those of us who are committing to helping dismantle empire so that we can create life-affirming worlds. I've been writing into that a little bit on my Instagram, but there's just more there that I think I might have, emphasized with a little bit more specificity and urgency.
Yeah, I mean, something that you and I have spoken about is that, as there are these kind of different roles and assignments in the planetary awakening and the collective liberation, that there's people that are going to be needed to create the kind of healing that is going to be necessary for the kind of next layers of what we're seeing. And how do we kind of mobilize those people and get some of this ready so that when it's time that we can actually disseminate that information and those tools and that medicine and things like that. Can you say a little bit about some things that you're currently, the earth is calling you to do right now, other than to share about this book and be speaking openly about it? Is there anything else that you would like to share?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is that. It is, I really feel the task, this moment has, I feel like, called me to integrate all the different types of knowledge I've cultivated throughout my life. My background as an organizer, my background as a someone trained as a therapist and a social worker, my background in traditional healing, my background in like spiritual practice of various traditions, my background in earth medicine and herbs and all of this stuff. I feel like it feels like this moment is calling me to truly integrate all of these skills toward, and I kind of understand why I have them, why I've had different experiences. So some of the stuff I've been working on, I am supporting a mutual aid campaign for direct cash assistance to folks in Gaza, to support their survival and I feel the earth is asking me to support the affirmation of life, which also means to tend to the living and to support life as much as possible, including resistance against the forces that attempt to desecrate it. You all can find my mutual aid campaign. It's coordinated with Friends from Gaza. It's direct relationships to direct families. We're also working on honestly, it's a whole book of its own. We've been working, me and some amazing herbal peers and friends have been working on an herbal guide for the medical workers in Gaza who have, lost all access to their institutions, as we recently saw the horrific raids at Al-Shifa Hospital, which is just one of the hospitals that has been targeted in unimaginable ways. So an herbal guide for medicines, that could be useful based on what we're told is still available in Gaza, based on the herbs that are available from some of the apothecaries that are still standing, and just being of practical service as much as possible, and really thinking through preparing for the day after and preparing for the skills that are going to be needed to truly interface with the level of trauma and devastation, both on the land and the people, and supporting the organizing. Honestly, I never thought I would go back into organizing as much as this moment has really been like, okay, really addressing the systems is very important right now. So what is my role, and how do I support other land workers to understand our unique role in supporting the movements during this moment? And yeah, I think my book feels like I see more its role in the days after than I do in the now. So I'm grappling with what is the service to be of now, while preparing as thoughtfully as possible. And, I think so much of it is just showing up for our communities and for the people that we are able to support who are directly impacted in all the ways. So,
Yeah. I'm just thinking about kind of our initial conversation around that time about us having a conversation, creating something, doing something, and we were kind of trying to find that moment to align, and that moment's here, which is incredible.
wow, I know, right? Months. Wow, it's 6 months later. Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's something.
so
You,
grateful.
it's great. It's beautiful. And it's really, I think, it's significant to me. It's meaningful to me that, you and I have been in conversation, and, we talked a little bit about like how the plans vouch for us, but I feel like Nefertum Blue Lotus kind of brought us together into each other's orbit
True.
months and months ago. But it's very meaningful to me that this moment is the one that actually brought us into a different kind of relating. And I'm very much paying attention to the fact that there's a role that we each have and that we have together towards the support of this moment. And so, that honors me, and I honor you, and I thank you for showing up for that, honestly, with me.
Yeah, thank you for seeing me, and thank you for this work, and thank you for being willing to like jump on a call with like essentially a stranger and kind of connect in that way to find out how we can support one another and how we can both show up and support our communities in these different ways, and also to be able to be in service and to expand all the current things that we're each doing. And again, as I said, oftentimes there's so many things that I know you're doing behind the scenes that don't get recognized and everything.
Same.
So just appreciating and valuing you for who you are. And
thank you.
what has brought us together is is something that on some level, of course, I wish was not happening.
Right.
And at the same time, I also have a lot of trust in the earth and the way that the earth creates this divine orchestrations of like, okay, I need you two to be talking right now because you have a piece and you have a piece, and like let's kind of build relationship from that place. So.
I mean, truly. Truly.
So there are some questions that are coming in already. So someone is asking, thank you for this wonderful conversation. Can you tell us about any personal or shared rituals you partake in to support yourself? And I feel like this is a conversation that we often have. I often ask, how are you taking care of yourself?
Well, I'm not gonna lie, not that well all the time, but one ritual I do maintain no matter what is going on is that when I wake up in the morning, even though I'm not going to lie because I really am human, and lately sometimes I wake up in the morning and I look at my phone first because I need to know what's going on. But really, when I wake up in the morning, I try to make it my practice to acknowledge the earth and my ancestors and my supporting spirits and the lineages and the lands that I come from and that I live on, and just acknowledge the spirit of life, and the divine, um, before I do anything else. And that ritual helps anchor my life in a way that is, you know, ceremonial, basically, and connected, um, as I go on my day doing all the things.
Mm.
How about you? I feel like that's a question we can both answer if you feel like
Mm.
it.
Yeah, I mean, I like think that was coming through in regards to something that I know that you do, and you talked about it, is that remembrance,
Mhm.
that kind of constant remembering and acknowledging. I would say mine is the same, and because of my mystical lineage that I am Sufi, I do have specific zikr
Mhm.
practices that I'm prescribed, certain prayers that I'm asked to do. And believe it or not, as I'm learning so many of some of the ancient ways that the mystics connected to the divine and the beloved in a very embodied way, is there are actual like ancient practices of staring at the sunlight on the ocean,
Mm.
and these things that I'm being like required or asked to do or
Mm.
invited to do,
Beautiful.
as a part of um, my lineage. I'm just in awe of the fact that these are the things,
Right,
and walking barefoot, and
right.
there's practices in the Sufi tradition of actually being buried in the earth, like
Yes.
up to your neck,
Your
like
neck.
actually being in the earth. And so these these ways of relating to a personal,
Right,
divine, a personal divine being, and not some
right,
figure in the sky or something
right,
like that you have to go through some other intermediary to connect with,
right.
but actually being in love with the beloved. Those are the things that feed me and sustain me.
Absolutely.
And the more that I'm clear on who I belong to and who I come from and who sustains me, I have more of an access point and a connection to that. So
Beautiful.
yeah,
I'm looking at sunlight on the ocean is always recommended.
it's good medicine. It's really good medicine. Um, yeah, I feel like this is another question that I can imagine us both speaking to, and someone's saying they want to connect more to the unseen. What is, how do you envision, what is your way with that?
Honestly, I think sometimes we should work with what's seen before we go into the unseen. I think that a lot of us, I don't want to make any assumptions about this person, but I think the earth is a really powerful portal to reconnecting on all levels. And I think that one of the unseen realms that we often neglect is the one inside our own being.
Yeah.
So many of us are just walking around with like really having a hard time connecting to the unseen of our own internal self. Um, and the unseen world is not, I don't know, it can be a dangerous one. So I think it's like a really wise thing to spend plenty of time, you know, and the working with plants is an amazing way to just like you choose one plant that you're feeling called to from your lineage or that you're feeling invited to connect to. And, like a rose, if you don't have a
Mhm.
particular plant, work with rose for a
Mhm.
while and just really be present with how it's affecting your internal landscape over an extended period of time, and really be with the unseen that it opens inside you. And I feel like the other more expansive layers of unseen energies sort of reveal through that. Dreams, you know, are another way that I think a lot of us, you know, maybe don't heed all the time. You can work on your sleeping hygiene and your dreams. But yeah, I think like familiarizing ourselves with the unseen inside of our own being is like a good way to start.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. And the thing that was coming to me, definitely in the context of this conversation, is actually getting more familiar with the way your body communicates messages to you.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
that kind of interoception. Because I do think that it is a really important skill. Like you said, the unseen can be a dangerous place. And we do need to be able to develop that discernment. And there's a lot of mixed messages about what do butterflies in the stomach mean, right?
Uh-huh.
True love, or is it the fight or flight kind of so, right? Like I do think that like we need to kind of separate out what we've been taught about what our body is communicating and develop more of a rapport with that guidance system.
Right.
Not just because it's going to support you in navigating the quote unquote unseen, but because it's going to help you in practical everyday life to be able to make decisions, right? Like really being able to like own your no and own your yes. I really do think that that is a skill that is really being asked of us. You know, anytime we kind of like talk about more sort of ascension, what the earth like wants us to know is that in order to do that, we need deeper descension. Like we need deeper roots.
Exactly.
And you know, you and I both know that there's been an intentional kind of split and an intentional kind of hijacking of spiritual traditions, spiritual practices to encourage people to be disembodied.
Right.
And what we know is that if you're not in your body, someone else is, right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, really kind of owning your space and your being, I think is profound. And you know, and you also said dream, so I have to loop back around to that because we are both avid dreamers.
Yes.
And you do talk about dreaming in your book. And one of the other questions that I had that I'm recalling now is I know that I've had plants show up for me in dreams, and that's how I knew that they wanted to work with me. What are some of the ways that for people that are really interested in starting to work with plants, what are some of the ways that those plants can kind of start to show up for us?
Yeah, dreams are a big one for me. In fact, the dream, I didn't think I was gonna work with plants in this way.
Yeah, you said that.
I was on like a whole other kind of, I mean, it was related, but I was on a healing path, but it wasn't necessarily centering about plants. And I just had dream after dream after dream after dream about, you know, needing to learn about the plants and actually also the stones. I also had a lot of dreams about working with the minerals. But I even had like a dream that told me exactly who to learn from, exactly who to, you know, so it was just very clear. But I think it comes back to what we're saying, which really is that the more you get into your body and into being able to attune to how your own senses communicate, the more you're going to be able to discern and connect with the unseen, and the more you're going to be able to discern and feel the call from plants, from whatever else it is that's calling you. And it's like, yeah, we are part of the land. We are part of the spiritual world too. We're both. We're beings that exist between the two. So the more we arrive, the more we expand. Really.
Yeah, one of the things that, you know, you and I also didn't get a chance to talk about, but I said, I was like, I want to talk about this. In the book, you shared about how one of the strategies that the colonizers used specifically in creating that displacement, specifically in places like Gaza, is that they have actually criminalized
Yes.
being able to harvest
Right.
certain plants, and that even certain plants have been targeted that are the plants of culture that have the relationship has been built over time. And that was reminding me of what I was learning from some indigenous elders in this area in the Kashaya Pomo land about how the Northern California, the land and all of the beings and the people developed in relationship with the fire element.
Right.
And how the fact that the original stewards were not the ones tending the land, that the fire, right, all the kind of California wildfires were erupting and they were uncontrollable.
Exactly.
Can you speak to that idea a little bit, that there is that intentional kind of criminalization and severance with those fundamentally, you know, key plant allies and plantcestors?
Yeah. Yeah, this is where I think there is no way to be a land steward in integrity without really understanding that, like, being stewards of land puts us into a direct conversation with colonialism and the ways that it has strategically and intentionally severed not only individuals' relationships from those plants individually, but like you're saying, the whole traditions of stewardship that end up maintaining the integrity of ecosystems that affect the livelihood of our entire planet, you know? And so we have to resist and make it our business to understand that indigenous peoples' traditional ways of living and knowing and sovereignty is fundamental to the integrity of our, you know, our land, of our ecologies across this earth, and of the integrity of both land and culture lives in this place of generational stewardship that learns and evolves and adapts with land over time and therefore knows how to care for it. And when they are severed from being able to do that, it actually compromises all of the life within that ecosystem, including all of our ecosystems, because the earth is interconnected in that way. And so this is also part of why it's so important for us, especially as diasporic folks, to try and take the lead and learn as much as possible from traditional stewards when we have the opportunity, because their knowledge is coming from generational kinship and adaptation to place. It comes, and they have the tools for resisting climate crisis and all this stuff, and like also all the spiritual tools and stuff, because they have been evolving to the changes that have taken place in a particular landscape for generations. And they have the understanding of what's shifting, how it's shifting, how to rebalance it, and are part of the ecosystem. And so it's really, it's deep, deep stuff.
Yeah, I think that was, you know, that place I think is a lot actually where our work kind of parallels, because the way that I refer to them as the anti-life forces.
Exactly.
Because their behavior is recognizable when you realize that they don't honor life.
Exactly.
Right? And so, like, because they don't honor life, they don't honor children, they don't honor the earth, they don't honor women. And so again, that, you know, that behavior starts to be, I think sometimes when you use certain language, people are like, oh, I don't, it's political, I don't want to get involved in that. But when you actually speak to the mechanism itself, people are like, oh, that I get. You know, And one of the things you spoke about in your book is you said that actually the way to resolve if there is, let's say, a sustainability concern about certain over harvesting of certain plants, it's to allow the original people that are in relationship with that plant spirit to guide and direct what happens next, not to do the exact opposite and put, certain laws and criminalizing certain things in place. That kind of response is it's not going to work. It's fundamentally not going to work.
Exactly. And actually, some of my indigenous elders here in California, like one of my elders and teachers, beloved teachers and friends, Olivia Chumacero, always talks about how, we actually have to, our relationship with the plants is as much part of their livelihood and their existence as, as anything else. Like we're part of these relationships, just like pollinators are part of a relationship. And so, and it's just that we've forgotten how to be in good relationships. And so, those relationships being maintained is important. And when they get severed, sometimes the descendants lose the knowledge of how to tend. And then capitalism pressures people into types of relationships that hurt the land. And so the continuity of the ability to adapt and evolve with the plants and the ecosystems and agriculture and whatever is just such an important part of it staying a life affirming force rather than a life, like you call them the anti-life forces. I call them the life desecrating forces. But yeah, we're on the same tip on that for sure.
Yeah. And, one thing that is clear to me is that the earth is definitely initiating people. And whether it be because that was what we agreed to before we came, or whether it be because there's certain things like accessible within our DNA that can be awakened if we go to certain sacred sites and things like that. That process is happening. And yeah, many more people are saying yes. And humans do have a part, like we do have a part. I think sometimes there can be a lot of language around how humans are like the cancer on the planet and all that kind of stuff. But for me, with the beings that I walk with, they have continually said to me, this is the part in the timeline where humans are supposed to be working with, the nature spirits and having these councils, like earth councils of earth guardians, of like working together and stewarding this next layer of the evolution of not just the beings on the planet, but the planet itself. Like the planet is a living consciousness, a living being. Someone's asking a question, and I think we have time for it. How you came across the word Plantcestor? And I know that you're always asked about this word. What would you like to share about how that all emerged?
I mean, my ancestors on the plants gave it to me, I guess, I don't know. It's just like, I mean, I had been, the idea of plants as ancestors, and I write about it in the book, and you can read more, so I won't say much, so we have time for some of the other questions. But the concept of plants as ancestors is not mine. That's like indigenous knowledge from many places in the globe. And so, I have teachers who shared that with me. And I remember, I think one of the first person who ever said to me, the plants are our ancestors, was Atava Garcia Swaiseki, my friend. I was in a dream circle that she had been hosting, and we were talking after, a few of us were talking after class or something, and she said, well, the plants are our ancestors and blah, 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 whatever it was that happened. And then I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then I was still kind of like, I hadn't deep dived into my relationship with plants yet, but it was, I was more on a traditional healing path at that time. And then a few years later, as I kind of deepened my relationship with plants and just started doing this work, I I don't know, I just heard it one day, Plantcesters, you know? I just feel like it was they gave it to me. They gave it to me. And yeah,
Yeah,
and now
I
I
know.
share it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know you talked about that sort of how you arrived at this. You didn't go looking for plants or and you said in fact they came, knocking at your door, but you were searching.
Yes.
You talked about, what are the ways that our grandparents healed and not necessarily having complete access to all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd just love to, if there's anything you want to share or say as we are kind of closing out this last bit
Yeah.
about just that. um I I feel that there's this sort of vulnerability of like the recognition that certain healing practices, certain traditions, certain aspects of culture, someone had to be the one to connect to the earth and to bring that forth. And we are at a time when, yes, we are reconnecting to the ways that our ancestors healed. But one of the things, for example, that one of my teachers always says when I, connect with certain practices, maybe within the Dharmic tradition, Buddhism, it's asking for us to make them relevant now.
Right.
And I always talk about letting the moment initiate you. And I think about how, there was someone that from the earth and from their connection with, the all that is, like Qigong came to be, right? Like there was someone that channeled that. So I would, as a steward, I do feel that there's something that the earth is asking us to bring forth that's current and perhaps even new. And that can be really vulnerable. It can be all the things, right? And I would just love to have you share a little bit about this place of honoring the traditions, but also being on the leading edge.
Yeah, it's a really important question, especially right now in the context of what we're living, and the way that I see it is that I really don't have answers. What I have is a process or a relationship to try to cultivate and lean on as best I can. And by its nature, it's very much an emergent kind of methodology or process. And so what I feel and what I know in my soul of souls and what I know based on all these things and all these lineages and all this work and all of it is that the earth is our source. It's the source. It's actually the source of these traditions that our ancestors came up with, and the source of their expressions. Even if it came from a spiritual place, it became manifest through the earth and through our embodiment on the earth. And for everything that has been lost and forgotten, and this is really the fundamental point that I hope comes through this book, through everything lost and forgotten, through all the ways that we're fragmented, through all the ways that all things are changing, and our ancestors have never lived a time quite like this one. One thing that is still here is the earth, the source through which all of these learnings happen. And so these tools and these ways hopefully bring us closer towards the earth and its paradigm in order for us to be receptive enough as vessels and clear enough and resourced enough and connected enough to become channels for that which is meant to be expressed through us. And I believe that our ancestral traditions, why I look to our indigenous ancestors, is because not so we reproduce exactly what they did. It's because they lived lives that were built on that axis. And I know that that axis is where that power is, to be like vessels of life affirming processes for whatever it is that wants to shift right now. And I just want to say, I did see a brief question about the Lebanese person who's talking about not being enough. So I'm just going to say on this note, like, there is no not enough. Like, we all have our own purpose, our own energy, and our ancestors and our land that we're in and our lived reality of right now is part of all that process. It's not disconnected from where you come from or from who you are or from who you come from. And it really is just about becoming as close to our, just if we become close to the earth and ourselves,
Yeah.
the ways that those relationships inform who we are and how we move will naturally be a part of it because you are your ancestors. Whether you knew them or you're separate from their culture or not, in your body and in your spirit and in your heart somewhere, whatever continuation of that lineage you are meant to be does exist. And it's really just about kind of showing up for like the wholeness of who you are so that you can honor them through continuing in a purpose that that has allowed you to be on this earth. And no one on this earth doesn't have,
Yeah.
some kind of purpose. They might not be choosing to heed it in the best ways, as we see humans making lots of bad decisions, but we all have that opportunity. And so that's the call. And these are just some ways to hopefully return towards it.
Yeah, inshallah.
Inshallah, exactly.
Yeah, I always say the plants are teaching us how to be ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's
Exactly.
what's needed, and that's what's required for this planetary shift to happen. So
Exactly.
yeah, thank you so much for
Thank
everything.
you. Thank you, my sweet dear friend.
So beautiful. All right, thank you everyone. So
Yeah.
lovely to be with you all.
Thank you.